Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, which is all to do with coronavirus and returning to work after lockdown. So before we start, we would like to introduce ourselves. So I'm Victoria Templeton, one of the HR Knowledge Managers, and I shall be leading the webinar from the HR perspective. And I'm joined by Dom Greenwood, who will be leading the webinar from a health and safety perspective today. We have a team who's also on the webinar in the background, just to help support with any technical issues. And as with all our usual webinars, we shall be taking your questions at the end. So please do let us know if you have any questions as we go through today's webinar. Now, please note there are many of you attending today, and so for obvious reasons, you are all on mute. So to raise a question for us to answer at the end, then please do start noting on your comments in the comments box available to you on your dashboard as we go through. Here's a quick guide to show you how to do that. You can ask questions via GoToWebinar panel that should look something like this. Please type your question in the question pane and we'll aim to read out and answer as many as we can. And we want to make this session as interactive as we would normally at our physical events, so we will be running a series of polls throughout the session as well. When we have a poll, it will appear on your screen and you just select the answer that's appropriate for you. Please note, to be able to participate in the polls, then you will need to ensure that your screen is not in full screen mode. So without further ado, I'm going to be beginning the webinar looking at the HR aspects of planning and managing the return to work after lockdown. And so here is an outline of what I shall be covering, and we'll first clarify the current COVID situation, which, as we know, can change very quickly and suddenly. I'll then give you an overview of the legislation that's relevant to reopening and bringing employees back, after which I'll then take you through the key areas of HR, which I anticipate going to be important for any business, including resource planning and for the return to work, and how you approach bringing employees back, and what some of the potential HR challenges could be. And at this point, I shall then hand over to my colleague, Dom Greenwood, who will then talk about the health and safety aspects. So I will spend a brief moment now just highlighting the current situation as it stands. This is really important because we've seen so many changes and developments over the last year, and it's an ever-evolving situation. But from a workplace perspective, here are a few things that we should be considering. So first of all, the message at the moment remains to work from home if you can. And where this is not possible, then you need to return to the workplace. However, we started hearing reports last week that that message could change from the 21st of June. But again, over the last week, we're seeing updates daily in terms of any variants, etc. So who knows whether that 21st of June date will go ahead and if that message will change. But at the moment, the message is that work from home if you can. And at present, it is also recommended that you minimise travel. So for those employees who rely on public transport, this is really important. We heard in March as well that furlough would be extended, and we know that this scheme now will be in place until the 30th of September. And we also have vaccinations and vaccine passports. This is very topical subject, especially in regards to employment law. And I'm going to talk about this later on. But it is going to be something that many businesses will be contemplating and considering as a way to getting back to normality. And then we then have the requirement to maintain a COVID secure workplace. And even though we're making fantastic progress with the vaccination programme, we are expected to have some of the existing measures in place for some time. And so we need to bear in mind that many employees will feel nervous and anxious about returning. So how you plan for the return really should be considering this. And then, of course, we're all having to adopt new ways of working practices. So we are all going to have to consider our operating practices to ensure they remove or reduce any risk of COVID transmission. And when we come on to talking about health and safety, Dom will talk through more about that with you. So in terms of the agenda, we're now going to look at the relevant employment law aspects of planning that return to work. So I want to draw your attention to the legislation that's going to be relevant. I do want to stress, though, that as line managers, you're not expected to become employment law experts. However, there should be that awareness as a business so that you can recognise where risks may lie, what the key issues could be, and therefore when you should be seeking that advice. So here, I want to just highlight the main pieces of legislation, as I said, that could be affecting employment and that return to work. So we have the Health and Safety at Work Act of 1974 and the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations of 99. And this one relates to, both of these relate to ensuring that COVID secure workplace. We have the Equality Act of 2010, which can be relevant to many different aspects, but for example, furlough, unfurloughing and workplace vaccinations. And I'll talk about this as well shortly. We have the Employment Rights Act of 1996, which deals with the fair treatment of employees and also how it provides protection for them from whistleblowing. And then the Human Rights Act, in particular Article 8. And this particularly is relevant to the whole topic of workplace vaccinations. And then finally, the Data Protection Act of 2018 and the now UK GDPR legislation, which for the purpose of today is really relating to how you process, store and retain that data in regards to COVID and somebody's medical records, because essentially that's sensitive personal data. So I'm going to take these a little bit one at a time and just highlight to you the key issues. Now, if we start off with the health and safety legislation, so under the Health and Safety at Work Act, then you have a duty to protect the health and safety and welfare of your employees, as well as other people who might be affected by your business. So that will include visitors, customers, agency workers and contractors, for example. Section 2 of the legislation requires an employee to take all reasonably practicable steps to reduce workplace risks to their lowest level. And Section 7 of this Act is about where there is a failure to take all those reasonable practicable steps to reduce those risks to the lowest level, then it can be a criminal offence. We then also have some obligations for the employee. So from their perspective, Section 7 of this Act is all about their own duty to cooperate with their employer as is reasonably necessary. And this is really important for planning and managing that return to work, because if you're wanting to and needing to put in place certain measures, then ultimately employees potentially have to be complying with that. Then we also have the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations of 1999, which together with the Health and Safety at Work Act, there's a requirement to make a suitable and sufficient assessment of risks to employees' health and safety. Dom will probably be touching on this more fully later on in his health and safety section of the webinar, but really at this point I just want to set the scene in terms of the different aspects of legislation that's going to be important for managing that return to work. We then have the Equality Act of 2010, and this makes it unlawful to discriminate employees, as you probably know from all other aspects of managing people. And it even as well makes it unlawful to discriminate against prospective employees who are applying for jobs on the grounds, obviously, of a protected characteristic. Now, a protected characteristic is a specific aspect of a person's identify. So as you'll see here on the screen, we've got them listed: age, disability, gender reassignment, etc. So it is unlawful to discriminate, and discrimination can occur in several ways. So if we think about managing a COVID return to work, here are some ways in which perhaps we need to really be mindful of in terms of discrimination and avoiding it. So direct discrimination is when somebody is being treated worse than another person in a similar situation directly because of their protected characteristic. You then have indirect discrimination, and that's where a company has a particular policy or a working practice, and that has a worse impact on those that has a protected characteristic. We then have victimisation, when somebody is treated badly because they've made a complaint of discrimination under the Equality Act, and that ties in with perhaps whistleblowing claims and things like that. And then you also have disability, for example, discrimination that can be arising from a protected disability, protected characteristic. So if they're being treated unfairly because of something connected to it. And with disability itself as a protected characteristic, there's also that added requirement to comply with the duty to make reasonable adjustments. So we'll come on to talk about how these are all relevant to that return to work after COVID, but I just wanted to highlight it here. And then you've got the Employment Rights Act of '96. So under this, it means that employees have the right not to suffer a detriment or to be unfairly dismissed. Now, most cases, to claim unfair dismissal, an employee does need to have their 2-year service with the company, but there are exceptions to this. And so there can be some situations where the employer will not require that 2-year service. And in those cases, it's around what we call an automatic unfair dismissal. So if we think about that return to work during a pandemic, there are ways in which employees can claim automatic unfair dismissal, i.e. not have that 2-year service to raise a claim. And that could be, for example, if their return's not managed effectively in regards to, the health and safety. So if they have left the workplace or refused to attend work because they perceive their circumstances of imminent danger, or an employee is taking appropriate steps to protect themselves or others in circumstances of imminent danger, and where they've even made a protected disclosure, also known as whistleblowing. They're protected from dismissal, selection for redundancy, or from being made subject to a detriment. So these examples are where you don't actually need your 2-year qualifying service to raise those claims of automatic dismissal. And then I'll just briefly flag the Human Rights Act, because this is very relevant to the whole vaccination discussion. So essentially, at the Human Rights Act, and in particular Article 8, it requires that everybody has the right to respect for his private and family life, his home and his correspondence, as stated in the legislation, and that there should be no interference by a public authority with the exercise of this right. Now, that is an extract from the Act, and essentially what the debate is around vaccinations is actually how can you comply and conform to the Human Rights Act of the right to privacy and the right to no interference if you're being required to have the vaccine. So I just wanted to flag it because I know there are some businesses considering whether they make vaccines mandatory for their employees, and we will touch on this later and explain more about that. And then the final aspect of the employment legislation is around your data protection. So you need to be mindful of this and your responsibilities, because you are dealing with somebody's medical record when you're dealing with COVID. So whether you're dealing with somebody's absences from work because of COVID, whether they've been tested or vaccinated and you're holding that data, then that is sensitive personal data. So from a Data Protection Act perspective, you have to have a legal basis, first of all, for obtaining and processing their personal data. And one of those legal bases could be consent. And then you must have measures in place for how you process, store and retain the data, because you can only keep data for as long as necessary, and obviously data has to be secure. So it's really important that if you're having conversations with your employees about vaccination, testing, etc., that you're very mindful of what you're doing with that data and etc. So we're now going to then look at the resource planning aspects of returning to work. But before I do want to run a quick poll. And what I'd like to do is just find out in the next 3 months which of the following you think you'll be considering. So I'm just going to launch the first poll. You should see it now come up on the screen. And if you could all place a vote, and it'll be good to hear your thoughts. Remember to cast a vote. You don't need to be in the full screen mode. Okay. A few more moments and then I'll close the poll. Okay, let's close the poll. I'm going to share the results. So, okay, so it's positive in that a very low percentage is considering redundancy. So that's I guess a positive in this climate. Obviously, we're still seeing people continue with furlough. Obviously, that's something that hopefully can be a useful tool to just give that little bit extra time. But essentially, most of you are looking at bringing people back now from furlough. Okay, so thank you for that. That's good, interesting information there. So I'm just going to now hide the poll and we'll progress with the webinar. So I'm going to be looking at resource planning. So given the impact of COVID-19, reviewing your business plans and operating models is vital in terms of ensuring that your business can continue operating. And so with the easing of lockdown and obviously the success of the vaccination programme, businesses can now start to put firmer plans in place to move forward, albeit we still must have some caution around that. Now, business planning that underpins your people plan is going to be key for how you achieve your success through your people. And so a SWOT analysis is a good tool, for example, for how you can get a perspective from the business perspective and about the requirements that's relevant to the people, and it can help determine and build your business in the future. So if we think about resource planning specifically, think about what roles and skills you need in your business moving forward. If you do have people on furlough, then when do you need them back, and do you need them back all at the same time, or perhaps do you need to stagger the approach? And we still have those 4 months left of the furlough scheme. So actually, can you utilise it? So can it help you operate for longer in the hope that the extra financial support and extended time can help you to keep operating, which ultimately means either delaying redundancies or even avoiding them? And then can you support all your employees coming back? So is there enough work, or can you afford to continue paying for the number of employees you employ? So this review process may result in some difficult steps needing to be taken, but doing it is going to be so important for your success to continue to navigate out of the pandemic. So in terms of the options available, so there's many that are on the table. So first of all, we've got the Kickstart scheme or an apprenticeship scheme to help a business move forward. So we do know that the young people have been hit the hardest when it comes to employment as a result of COVID. And so for some employees, the Kickstart scheme or an apprenticeship may be the start of a long-term career offering for that young person. So not only is it fantastic to somebody for starting their career, but it can also be fantastic opportunity for the business, because it can bring you young people into your organisation who can then build and shape into the employee you need. And furthermore, you can also ensure that the learning they receive is tailored to your business. And for taking on a Kickstart placement, the government will fund the creation of a role for 25 hours a week. And that includes covering the cost of national insurance contributions and the minimum pension enrolment. So there's a real benefit to the Kickstart scheme there. And then we also have the furlough, as you all know, and we've got those 4 months left. So consider if it's necessary for your business to continue making use of this. You know, for some businesses, it might not have quite picked up yet, so you might need to continue with that furlough. But I would say with furlough, just make sure you're budgeting the additional costs, because from July, the employers will need to start contributing to the scheme. So it is in place until the 30th of September. And so from July, employers will be required to pay 10% of the hours not worked by their employees. And from August, this increases to 20%. The government, therefore, will then reduce theirs gradually over July and August to 17% and 60% respectively. But from the employee's point of view, they're still receiving their 80% of their normal wage. When planning return to work dates and who comes back when, then ensure you don't inadvertently discriminate if people are to be brought back in stages. So focus on either a process that's based on skills and experience, or you could even seek volunteers. As well as looking at your business activity for the coming weeks and months, and use that as a guide and structure for determining the roles that you're going to be bringing back. But as I say, you need to be avoiding inadvertently discriminating against people. And then in terms of notice, so whilst you will have a written furlough agreement in place with your employee that will most probably allow for an immediate recall to work, you should still give employees reasonable notice for coming back. This is particularly important, especially for those that have got childcare or other caring responsibilities, and they may need to make arrangements for that. We then have options that may help if you're still unclear on the future of the business. So there's the statutory layoff, and that's where you temporarily lay employees off, and those who have over 1 month can become eligible for statutory government payment of £30 per day for 5 days in any 3-month period. So this could be used if you anticipate work picking up soon and envisage your employees being able to come back in the near future. And then there's another short option of short-time working, which is where employees work reduced hours and have their pay reduced accordingly. So with both of these short-term options, ideally you want to be able to implement them with authority from the contract of employment. So some organisations will have a clause written in that allows them to place people on short-term leave and short-time working. So do check your contracts of employment. However, if there's nothing included, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do it. It just means that you have to go through a very thorough and fair process in which you're consulting and seeking the employee's written consent agreement before introducing it. You can't impose it because careful handling of it is necessary, because getting it wrong, that's where you could lead to breaches of a breach of the contract of employment and constructive dismissal claims. So do check your contracts of employment if those two avenues are something that you want to or need to pursue. And then finally, we have redundancy, and obviously looking at that poll, it's very positive to hear that there's a very low percentage of you that are considering that. But for those of you that are contemplating, then it's crucial that you follow the legislation in terms of consultation and a fair process. So you need to build into your plan the deadlines for consultation. Do check your contracts of employment to check what the notice periods are in case you enhance notice. And this will help all in the planning and timing of when you commence that process. So if you plan to make more than 100 roles redundant, then you have to consult legally for 45 days. If you plan to make 20 plus roles, but less than 100 roles redundant, then the consultation is 30 days. And where you're looking at making less than 20 roles redundant, then consultation, there's no specific time scale in law, but it has to be meaningful. So we would recommend generally a 2-week consultation process is generally a reasonable time frame to be able to consult with people on their views and the potential plans for redundancy. But obviously some situations may warrant more. So just build into your project plans the legal timeframes that you have. And so we're going to now move on to bringing employees back. And this is obviously going to be very, really important, not just when they're back, but also in the conversations you have with them in advance of when they come back. And I think it's going to be a very difficult subject for a lot of people in terms of how do we actually do it. I'm going to just run a quick poll again because it's interesting to see where perhaps the worries and concerns may be with returning to work. And this next poll is, what worries you about reopening your business? And it's either what happens if there's a COVID outbreak, what happens if employees are not wanting to come back, or you know, you're worried perhaps because you know you want to ensure that you're looking after all your staff sufficiently, and you know you might feel nervous around that. So it's just interesting to see what concerns are out there from everybody. Just leave it for a few more moments. Okay, let's bring this to a close. I'm going to close the poll and I'm going to share the results. So let's see what the results are. So 43% of you feel a bit nervous about what happens if there's another COVID outbreak in the workplace. That's absolutely understandable. And, you know, we've got Dom on the webinar, so hopefully he's going to be giving you some reassurances there. And then 61% employees not wanting to return back to work. And we're already hearing, aren't we, in the news around that, the anxiety that comes with now coming back. Mental health has been a big issue in terms of the pandemic, but I also think there's perhaps a lot of anxiety out there about actually now getting back to some kind of normality. And then ensuring that you're looking after your staff appropriately. So again, you know, what I'm going to come on to talk about and what Dom will have to say, hopefully that will help give a little bit of reassurance and comfort and help you in the next coming weeks and months. So thank you for your answers there. So let's move on. So when it comes to welcoming employees back, the most important thing will be to ensure your workplace has been reviewed and assessed, and then ultimately is that COVID secure. And that is something obviously Dom will help shed some light on later. You know, it's been over a year of living with the virus, and people are going to feel anxious and nervous, as I mentioned a moment ago, you know, when they come to return. And they're going to want to be reassured that the workplace they're returning to is safe. And so the important thing to focus on is how you identify what a COVID secure workplace looks like. And as I said, you know, this will need to be explained to your employees in advance of any return. You want to have their buy-in from the get-go and take them with you on that journey of reopening. You know, it'll help in their return, and hopefully through that conversation, that discussion, and being open in the measures you're taking will hopefully alleviate any fears. But we will talk about those a little more in the webinar. Also, as part of planning the return, you and your employees may have found that working from home has worked so well that you're actually supportive of perhaps hybrid working. We're hearing this phrase as well, which is, you know, basically a balance between working from home and coming into the office. Now, clearly not all businesses can accommodate working from home, or even they can't 100%, but may be able to do that blend. So start talking to your employees well in advance of any return, so you can effectively manage it, and so that it works not just for you but for your employees as well. And then a final thought around the return plans is around training. Don't forget training. You know, it's really important. You may have had new starters who joined you right at the start of lockdown, and so they never really got their full site induction. You know, you may have people that have missed out on training over the last year. You know, we know that development has been identified in a recent survey that we partnered with as being one of the main issues for SMEs in moving forward. And then, of course, we're going to have new working practices to ensure that everybody is working in a COVID secure way. So think about the training you may need to provide around any new working practices. It's going to be strange for everybody, and it's going to take time for us all to get used to. And then finally, think about your line managers. What support will they need in helping their teams come back? You know, what happens if they're having to deal with a situation when an employee has to self-isolate? What happens if there is that outbreak in their immediate team? You know, do they know who to go to, who to report to, and what to do in those situations? So having that training and guidance in your plans is going to be vital for helping that return. So in terms of bringing employees back, and we're going to just look at the role and how you can make the role itself COVID secure. So firstly, consider whether the role can continue working from home. If somebody, though, has a really strong reason for needing to be in the office, and there could be some really genuine reasons for that, then you must make all effort to achieve that. If operationally there's a challenge with working from home 100%, then you could the role be operated between home and the office, because by doing that, actually you're limiting how many people are on site at a given point. And as I said, we're hearing a lot about hybrid working. So do you want to look at moving and introducing a policy that can support a hybrid working approach? You know, that is probably a on-trend topic at the moment as well. So have a think about how the return to work may change your working environment. And then can you change the way in which the job holder's work is carried out so it makes it more COVID secure? So, you know, how can you rely more on technology, minimize that face-to-face interaction? I appreciate that obviously for some roles and activities, face-to-face interaction is really important from the social aspect, but just start looking at the role and activities and are there any that can perhaps be more streamlined? And can you look at structuring the working day differently for your employees? You know, you might be used to opening at, 9 to 5, but can you just allow some flexibility in when they start? So they might want to start at 7 and finish a bit earlier. So you're spreading the hours across the day, because again, that's all about how you're managing numbers on site at any point in time. And I mentioned right at the outset the guidance to minimise travel, especially people that are using public travel. So think about those employees that come to work either by the tube, bus, etc. And if they're having to come through at commute times, peak commute times, then actually can you work with them to adapting their hours either as short term or permanently so that they're avoiding travelling through those peak periods? And then can you accommodate some kind of flexible working arrangements to help those with caring responsibilities? You know, they're just some things that you could perhaps consider to the role for your employees. So we're going to look at now some of the possible challenges that will come with reopening, and that will include refusing to return, etc. So how do we get around the issue that somebody doesn't want to come into the workplace? Well, I've said a moment ago that staff engagement is going to be key. It's fundamental. Engaging your employees on how you're responding to COVID as a business will keep your staff informed and engaged, and therefore more likely to see them being receptive to returning and any of the changes that you're going to be bringing about. When it comes to health and safety, then there are duties on employers to consult so that employers and employees can work together in the practical management of health and safety issues. So in this case, informing and consulting with the employees on COVID information and consultation will help develop and promote positive measures and will help you to check their effectiveness. And again, all of this will help you have that engaged workforce. For those who are nervous in returning, then hold your one-to-one welfare discussions. How can you alleviate any of their fears or anxiety? And then as part of this conversation, then revisit the risk assessment, talk through that risk assessment with them. Doing so will either help them to see how you've covered all the identifiable risks and hopefully identified everything you can reasonably do to manage and remove the risk. Or equally, you may have missed something and didn't quite realise, and so your employee could be giving you further thoughts on what else could be done to help in alleviating their fears. You obviously want to have employees back, so there are going to perhaps need to be some compromises. Perhaps would it work to temporarily delay their return to the office and allow them to carry on working from home that little bit longer? Or how about, could you consider actually if you were to introduce workplace testing and therefore it's likely that more people have that greater confidence coming into work, knowing that everybody's being tested before they come to work. That might be something that helps alleviate some fears. And ultimately, if an employee was to not return, then essentially that leave of absence is unpaid on the basis that you're satisfied the workplace is COVID secure, you can evidence that it's COVID secure through your risk assessment, and that B, it's a reasonable request that you're asking them to be at work and there's no reasonable alternative. So if they were to not come in, then there is an argument that that leave would then be unpaid. But if you think back to at the start of the webinar when I talked about the different legislation, because that's really the context for managing somebody that's not wanting to come to work. So if they don't feel safe in returning, or if they've turned up for work, but then they soon feel like they need to leave because they don't feel comfortable with the arrangements, then there's the relevant legislation here is around the Health and Safety at Work Act and the management of health and safety regulations. In particular, this is about you having to undertake suitable and sufficient assessment of risks, but then also the Employment Rights Act. So employees have the right to not suffer a detriment or be unfairly dismissed. And we have within the Employment Rights Act the right to claim automatic and fair dismissal, as I mentioned at the start. And that can be in connection with health and safety and refusing to work. And in particular, if an employee perceives there to be a serious and imminent threat. Now, employees also have further protection in the form of whistleblowing. So if they make a protected disclosure, they are protected from dismissal, selection for redundancy, or from being made subject to a detriment. So in terms of COVID, it has the potential to be deemed as a serious and imminent threat by a tribunal in terms of the Employment Rights Act. So where an employee believes danger to be so serious and imminent, they will be required to show at that tribunal that there were circumstances of danger, i.e. COVID, which they reasonably believe to be serious and imminent. And under the legislation, it doesn't matter what the employer will have thought. What matters is actually what the employee reasonably believed at that time that they acted, i.e. by refusing to work or by walking out partway through. So it's not black and white though. And so what I mean by that is in the first peak, so last March, April 2020, it was probably most likely that COVID-19 was deemed a serious and imminent threat for the purpose of the Employment Rights Act because of the levels of cases and the transmission. But then as we moved into the summer and saw decreasing numbers, then it probably moved out of that remit of being a serious and imminent threat. But then again, obviously, we've had further outbreaks, and obviously in the autumn, winter months where the levels rose again, and obviously we had that further lockdown at the start of the year. Back then it most likely would again have been a serious and imminent threat, but obviously now we're back in a position where levels are relatively low. So it's just to highlight that COVID-19 has the potential to be deemed as a serious and imminent threat for the purpose of the Employment Rights Act. So if you're dealing with somebody that is refusing to attend work, then it's really important that you have that conversation, you explore what their concerns are, you work through your risk assessment, you try and identify if there's anything else you can do to alleviate their fees. And if you can try and find some kind of compromise, that's great. But ultimately, if you've got all your evidence to show that you've got a COVID secure workplace and you've exhausted all your options for how you can get them back to work, then if they don't come in, it's unpaid. Whether or not you go through any then disciplinary process is a very you need to take it case by case basis, because there's so many risks associated with this. You need to tread carefully, but hopefully in an ideal world, then you will get that those fears alleviated and be able to work to some kind of compromise. So I'm going to now move on to a further poll, and this is about which of the following measures do you think you're going to be considering in your business as we move forward. And this links into measures associated with that COVID secure workplace. So do you think you're going to be looking at mandating your employees to have the vaccine, mandating workplace testing, even having a policy of only offering employment to people that are vaccinated? Or do you think you'll consider some kind of employee declaration or voluntary testing? So I think this is a multiple choice, so be interesting to see what people's comments are. Okay. Let's bring this to a close, and I'm going to share the poll. So we have 11% of you thinking about mandating COVID vaccines, okay, and few more with mandating the testing, and most of you asking for voluntary testing for the workplace. Okay, and then a few of you think about declarations. So let's just come on to some of these measures now, and I'm just going to explain what comes with workplace screening. So before we move on to health and safety, I just want to run through several ways in which employers can consider workplace screening. So what I would say is that each business is different, each job role is different, and each employee circumstance is going to be different. What may work for one business may not necessarily work for another. What may be high risk in one business might be relatively low risk for another. So with that in mind, I'm going to just at high level talk through the main areas of screening. So that includes signed declarations, workplace testing, and vaccinations. But when considering workplace screening in general, the measure you identify must come through your risk assessment process, because that's essentially forming your business rationale for introducing it. The aim of any form of screening is ultimately to protect the health and safety of your employees and others that are affected by your business. And remember that as an employer, you must be taking all reasonable, practicable steps to reduce the workplace risks, but there is also a duty placed on employees to cooperate as is reasonably necessary. However, there is a right for employees to not have their employer interfere in their private life. And I would say that as we go through these following screening methods, the risks will vary depending on which one. So the most straightforward one, I would say, is your screening form. So you could use that for employees and visitors to sign before they come into the premises. It's a simple form that's completed, and essentially you're asking them to verify that they don't have any of the COVID symptoms, nor do any of their household members. There's not been anybody in their household that's been tested positive, or they've not been tested positive, and that they've not returned from any international travel in recent days, and so therefore not breaching any of the rules that surround that. Using that approach just means you have to be mindful of the Data Protection Act. You've got to have a legal basis to process it and hold the data, and obviously only hold it for as long as is necessary for that attendance. So that is something that's probably the most straightforward of ways in which you can take steps to making sure COVID is limited, or the transmission of COVID is kept limited. We then have workplace testing, and we know that lateral flow tests are now readily available. 1 in 3 people are asymptomatic, and therefore workplace testing is a good way to help stop the virus. In terms of employment legislation, then you need to be mindful of the Data Protection Act again, because holding and storing this sensitive personal data, because the results will be somebody's medical records, you just need to have the consent as a basis for processing it and manage it in line with data protection regulations. If you are going to introduce workplace testing, whether you choose optional or mandatory, it's a business decision, taking account of other measures you have in place, the context of your business, the job roles you employ. If you're considering making it mandatory but the employee refuses, then it will all evolve around whether your instruction to have it is reasonable. So for it to be reasonable instruction, you'll need to consider, is it necessary and proportionate? Is it compliant with UK GDPR? What is the type and context of work? For example, a care home is very different to an office environment. And are there any other measures that you have in place or you could put in place? We then have the issue of possible workplace vaccines, which is a complex issue legally and ethically. And remember, the government haven't even made vaccines mandatory. So thinking back to the slides at the outset around the legislation, the relevant legislation here is your Data Protection Act, the Health and Safety Act, the Human Rights Act, because Article 8 specifically is about the right of an individual not to have interference in their private life, and it is likely, as considered by in the legal profession, that mandating the vaccine would contravene this legislation. And then you have the Equality Act, where it's unlawful to discriminate employees. So if somebody who is pregnant, or where having the vaccine goes against somebody's religion or their age because they're not in that right priority group, then to have a policy in place that mandates vaccines is likely to be discriminatory. Now, in terms of I mentioned the pregnant, I know each person will get their advice from their GP, and pregnant employers, I believe at the moment, the information is that they can be vaccinated. However, an employee still may feel that they don't want to, and that's their choice. For whatever reasons, they will have their genuine reasons not to have it. So this is what I mean in the context of pregnancy. So just bear in mind that a policy to mandate it is likely to inadvertently, indirectly discriminate. Now, there may be some limited and exceptional circumstances where a policy to mandate COVID vaccines may be justified. And specifically, I'm thinking perhaps more those that operate in the health and social care. But even so, this hasn't actually been tested by the courts, and we still think there's contravenes the Human Rights Act. We know that the government are currently in consultations with the health and social care to see whether mandating it in care homes, but that consultation is still going on. But there are still many risks associated to it, and as I said, it's not been tested in the courts yet. In terms of, if you are considering applying a policy of mandating vaccines in general, there are, just so you know, 2 hurdles to get over. You've got to have a legitimate aim, which no doubt you will have. It's basically to stop the transmission. But secondly, the method of achieving that aim must be proportionate. Now, there's an argument out there that you can get around having to force mandate vaccines by requiring people to have tests instead, because testing is far less invasive than forcing somebody to have a vaccine. So there is a big debate out there, and there are many risks associated, but there are risks around whether actually mandating it could be indirect discrimination. And so there's 2 further areas to think about in terms of vaccines. Can you refuse employment on the grounds of the applicant not being vaccinated? And what if international business travel is fundamental to the performance of the role, and so therefore you need to mandate it? So essentially the risks are similar to what I outlined a moment ago, in terms of it has a potential for these policies to be unlawful in terms of indirect discrimination, because there are people that won't be able to have the vaccine. You know, those who are young because they've not got the category, pregnant workers, people with serious ill health conditions, somebody's religion, etc. So whilst you may have a legitimate aim, which is to stop that transition and to act socially responsible, there probably are other ways in which you can achieve that aim, i.e. through those tests. So as I said, these points haven't been tested. We do know in terms of the law, in terms of how discrimination laws work. So it'll be interesting to see any case rulings that come out, but these are the risks that you have when you're considering those kind of policies. So I'm going to now hand over to Dom, and Dom can then start covering off the health and safety aspects. So over to you, Dom. Are you on mute, Dom?
Thanks, Victoria. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you now, yeah.
No, can you hear me? You hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Thanks, Victoria, and welcome everybody to the sort of health and safety section, and thanks to Victoria for that really insightful first section there. I will apologise straight away because my Wi-Fi seems to be dipping in and out a little bit. So if you do lose me, I'll apologise for that. But we're going to look generally over at sort of the different tools that are available for employers to elicit a safe return to work. The first thing really would be to review the COVID risk assessment. Everybody should have done one of those possibly 9, if not 12 months ago now, and now is really the time to be reviewing that, because that may be not the case. Things have changed, government messaging has changed, as you've already heard in the webinar as well. Different people's situations have changed, the workforce has changed, and it could be that the workplace has changed. So absolutely you need to review the COVID risk assessment. The second point on this slide would be to review the workspace and the operations that take place in there. Again, you may have moved equipment around, you may have moved the office around, you may have gridded certain places in a factory, for instance. And so really it's looking at what you can do make that workspace and operations really, really safe. Have you got a COVID-19 policy? There's a number of different infectious disease policies around. We can certainly help you formate that, but a specific COVID-19 policy would be really, really useful, so that all staff would know what they can and can't do. And again, it could be that you could bring in some of the points that Victoria made on the previous slide with regards to testing, vaccination, and it would just encompass everything that your company is trying to achieve wrapped up in one document, which you could then train staff on, use it as part of an induction process, refresher training throughout the year. COVID marshals are something that a number of clients I'm working with are putting in place, and it's an extension to the health and safety team. It could be a member of the health and safety team, it could be a member of the HR team, or an operations manager, or whoever you wish it to be, but it's somebody with a designated responsibility to look at whether the COVID policy and the workspace and operational plan is being brought into place, and that everybody really is doing what they should be doing with regards to sanitisation, with regards to COVID secure environment, with regards to anything to do with COVID itself. So a COVID marshal is something that I'm seeing far more when I'm in and around different workplaces and client offices and factories, for instance. And there would be a certain level of responsibility of that, working closely with the health and safety team, the operations team, and the like. You can move us on. Yep. Staff return to work guide, it's often called a reboarding guide rather than an onboarding guide. So an onboarding guide would be more of an induction process and for new staff, and this would be more about reboarding people back into the workplace, reorientating people into a place that they once worked at and haven't been there for some time. And it would encompass pretty much everything we've just covered in the last four or five bullet points, but it's something that would be pulled together. And again, we can help you with that. I've just done one for HR Solutions, and we've rolled that out across a number of clients, and already it's getting great feedback because it's something that they can send to the staff before they come back in. They can overview it on Teams or Zoom calls, and it really just builds that confidence with regards to the staff coming back into the workplace. And gives them the confidence to come back in a safe and secure environment. Victoria's already mentioned this previously in the webinar, but staff communication is absolutely key. Some staff may not have been in for 6, 9, 12 months. They may have had COVID themselves. They may have had friends and family who have unfortunately had it, and there could be losses in their family and friend groups. So their anxiety levels may be quite high. They may not be looking forward to coming back in. They may be worried about coming back in. But to have regular staff communication, whether that be through webinars, whether that be through WhatsApp groups, whether that be through Zoom or Teams calls, I think is really, or we think is really, really important. So talking to your staff, and I think it needs to be done from the top down. I think it's something that management, senior leaders, operations managers, directors should do. To make the staff feel like they're very much part of the reboarding process, and to again build that confidence, so when they do come back in, they know exactly what they need to do and what the workplace is going to look like. Staff orientation, and again, Victoria mentioned earlier that some staff may have only just joined the company either just before the lockdown or even over lockdown. So they may not be aware of the building and how operations work, where the emergency exits are, even silly things like the kitchen and how that works, and just your culture and how your company works. So a staff orientation program or even a reorientation program would be really, really useful. You can, again, that could be brought into the return to work guide and the COVID-19 policy, but to actually physically get staff to do a company walk round, show them where everything is, how things have changed. You may have decided to redecorate and do deep cleaning, have new equipment, new machines, lay out offices very differently. So just to reintroduce them to the workplace and have a staff orientation program would be really, really useful. And again, would build that confidence and make them really feel like they're part of that reboarding process. Staff training. So again, with regards to the COVID marshals that you may decide to introduce, there'd be a part of that would be staff training, so they understand what they would need to do to encompass all of your COVID-19 policies and to implement a COVID secure workplace. But then how would that then impact on the rest of the team? What do they need to do on a daily, weekly, monthly basis with regards to checking different areas, cleaning different areas, and just really upskilling them in the government messaging and Public Health England's messaging on COVID-19. So a period of staff training, which again could be a webinar-based training session like we're doing today. It could also be videos. There's a number of different videos available, and some workplaces have put some really good staff training and staff orientation videos out there on YouTube and things like that. There's also some governmental videos available. So a short and sweet, very targeted staff training session would be really useful to work on those staff members back. Signage and information. Are we putting up visual prompts for staff? Is there a health and safety central area where COVID information could be stored? I think some companies would be very confident in saying yes, we've done that, and others would be less so because they haven't done that. So a central area where you can have all of your health and safety information, which could range from fire procedures, fire policy, first aid, and general health and safety, and then COVID information, who the COVID marshals are, what the COVID process would be. Equally, there could be signage with regards to a secure COVID working environment. And there's now some really good health and safety posters on what to do if there's a COVID outbreak in the workplace, what COVID would look like, signs and symptoms, and just some various information around that. And later in the presentation, you'll see an image of some signage that's available. Again, Victoria's touched on mental health, massively important. I'm being asked about mental health far more over the last 3 or 4 months, certainly since January, than I was obviously last year. A number of workplaces are really getting involved with mental health, purely because the staff members have been off working from home, have had unfortunate losses and illness in their family and friend groups. There could have been losses and illness in the work staff groups as well. So a positive outlook on mental health issues and some awareness would be really useful. We offer a level 2 and level 3 course in mental health first aid. In fact, I'm teaching one on Monday, which can be delivered in your workplace, or we run delegated courses as well. And we're more than happy to send out information with regards to that. But thinking about how we can help, and then various signposting would be other ways that employers could welcome staff back. So signposting, again, there's a number of different governmental and public health information areas we can show you towards the end of the presentation. So that's just kind of an overview of what we're going to cover. So we take the COVID-19 risk assessment, and I've already sort of suggested that it's now time to review it. You may have completed this 6 to 9 months, 12 months ago, but what's changed, and does it still reflect your workplace and the government guidance? There's a link there at the bottom of that the document. If you'd like to take a screenshot of that, you're welcome to do so, and if not, this presentation will be available. But that will take you straight to the HSE government website, where there is a sample templated coronavirus risk assessment. Please don't just use that one as yours. It needs to be made specific. It needs to reflect your organisation, your workforce, and the different tasks and activities that take place there. It's a really good starting point. But you need to almost fill in the gaps. It's a 50% job that they've done for you, so you need to do the rest. But does it cover, and does yours cover people? People being the most important thing in this process, from their job role to the way they come into the building, to sanitisation, to the use of kitchens, toilets and changing areas. The work activities that are taking place, and it could be that people work in very close proximity. It could be that they lone work. It could be that they're in an office environment. Cleaning, massively important. It could be that you use third-party cleaning providers and third-party cleaners, and they would bring their own chemicals. It could be that you've got a internal cleaner that's on your payroll, so to speak, and we need to think about how we manage cleaning and what is actually being cleaned in and around the building. Social distancing is still obviously the message that we're looking at. Obviously, the distancing changes. It was 2 meters, then it went down to 1.5 meters, and down to 1 metre, and obviously your risk assessment would need to reflect what is currently going on with regards to the government messaging. And as Victoria alluded to, we don't really know what's going to happen on June 21st at the moment. Everything could be removed or it could be extended due to various different variants that we've now had become apparent in the UK, and obviously anything that happens between now and then as well. General gatherings with regards to courses, meetings, work events and all that kind of thing, how is that going to be looked at, and how is that going to be managed going forward currently and from June 21st? Your risk assessment would need to cover that. Ventilation is massively important, and it could be that you've got an air handling system that has got the ability to bring in fresh air from outside. It could be you've got an air conditioning system that hasn't got the ability to do that, but it's chilling processed air that's being driven from either a compressor unit. It could be that you haven't got any of that, and it's going to be kind of windows and doors that are being left open. And I've got a link later on in the presentation from the CITB, which is the Construction Industry Training Board, with regards to which is a really good link on ventilation guides and what you should be doing with regards to ventilation. Face coverings and PPE. Obviously, if staff require PPE as an employer, you mandatory have to supply that. But it could be that in communal and staff areas, you as a business are going to say that everybody needs to wear face coverings. And I would say if I look at all my kind of clients I'm working with on a regular basis, 75% of those are still asking staff members and visitors, consultants and suppliers to wear face coverings in and around the building, the office, the factory, whatever that might be. And we've covered mental health as well, and I think it does have a place on the COVID-19 risk assessment. It needs to be looked at. Everybody needs to have a positive mental health in the workplace, and what can employers do to engage the workforce with regards to bringing positive mental health into the workplace. So absolutely, mental health should be on the COVID risk assessment. Again, we can help you with your COVID-19 risk assessment, but please do make sure that those kind of 8 to 10 points are covered on your COVID-19 risk assessment. And if you need any guidance, there's a really good government link there at the bottom. Hoping that was helpful. We can move on, Victoria.
PC, Dom.
Thank you. Workspace and operations. The workplace needs to be looked at with, I can, that's just a bit slow coming through, that's fine. The workplace needs to be looked at with new eyes, and I think it's really important, certainly for senior leaders, operations managers, line managers, duty managers, whatever that might be, is to go around and look at the workplace with new eyes when you come back. There's a stat there that some workplaces have had less than 5% of staff in, so now consider bringing everyone back, where kind of 95% of the workforce haven't been in. So things need to be looked at and revisited, and certainly emergency plans, have they been updated? Have things been reviewed? Have emergency systems been tested, which would cover your fire alarm, your emergency lighting, your fire extinguishers, your sprinkler systems, should you have any, your AED defibrillator if you've got one. So think about things that should have been done over the last 12 months that may haven't been done. Have the emergency plans been revisited? Are they still relevant? Due to the coronavirus and due to changing the factory or the office system or setup, have fire exits been changed? Have the emergency exits been moved? Have the muster points been moved? I think someone's going to have to go in and have a look at this kind of stuff. Things like boiler servicing, whether it be gas or electricity. Certainly if there's a gas boiler, there should have been an annual gas safe certificate issued, and that may have been missed because the business was either closed or the person that was doing that wasn't around. It could be that PAT testing, electrical testing, Legionella testing has also been missed. So think about your statutory compliance in those areas. Think about your health and safety compliance. Has your fire risk assessment elapsed while you've been out of the building or away? Do you need to, were there actions on there that should have been put in place over the last 6, 9, 12 months? So revisit your fire risk assessment. Your Legionella risk assessment equally as important. That would cover, can you just go back one? Sorry, Victoria, there. You've jumped ahead, that's brilliant. Your Legionella risk assessment would obviously cover things like water systems, showers, spas if you've got them, and air conditioning. Lifting regulations, which would come under the LOLA regs. Certainly, if you've got a passenger lift, that should have been tested every 6 months, and if you've got one of those, it should have been done. If you're using things like forklifts, lifting platforms, MUPs, under the PASMA regulations, they need to be looked at as well. And things like COSH and DESIR assessments. DESIR would be dangerous substances which could explode or highly flammable. Think about whether or not that needs to be looked at as well. And again, the ventilation setup that we talked about earlier, there is a guide there, which again, if you'd like to take a screenshot of, or if you just want to Google the CIBSE ventilation guide, it's a really, really good and useful guide. So just think about some of the workspace and operational checks that might need to be put back in place before staff revisit the building. If you'd like to move on now, Victor, that's fine. Your COVID-19 policy, the first question there is, have you got one? And obviously, if the answer is no, it'd be absolutely worth putting one in place and contacting us if you'd like some support with that. What should it cover? There's a number of different areas that it should cover. It should have obviously an introduction and scope. What is the policy trying to achieve? A method statement, and it would cover things like home working, going back into the workplace. What is your social distancing guidelines? Workplace hygiene. If you've got a kitchen, are you allowing people to share cups, for instance? Washing up, regulations. How many people you'd allow in the kitchen area? If you run toilets and changing areas, changing rooms, for instance, staff rooms, what are you going to do with those? People's personal hygiene and health as well. We've already talked about the visitor declaration form. Some companies I'm working with are running a staff declaration form, and they're getting staff to fill it in on a 24-hour, 48-hour period. It could also cover testing and vaccinations as well. Would need to include visitors and guests. What happens if a visitor decides to come to the building? A supplier, a client, a contractor. We have a duty of care over anybody that comes into our buildings, so we need to make sure that they're following the rules just the same as the staff are as well. What's your policy going to be on meetings? Are we still going to be running with Teams meetings, Zooms meetings, or are you going to start bringing people back to kind of sit around the boardroom table? And again, I've got a kind of 50-50 split on that with the clients I'm working with. Some companies are more than happy to bring people back for meetings because they've got big enough boardrooms to socially distance, ventilate. Others haven't got that facility, so they're still doing Zoom and Teams meetings. But think about how that might change in the next couple of months. Are you allowing staff, maybe consultants, maybe sales teams to go off-site and work with other clients? And if that's the case, what kind of PPE, social distancing, sanitisation are we putting in place for those members of staff that are off-site? And then just think about what your workplace testing regime is going to be, and or if you're going to have one at all. Victoria mentioned earlier, some companies are actively doing that, others are not. And we know now you can get free PCR tests from places like Boots and obviously your doctors as well. So to think about what you'd like to roll into your COVID-19 policy with regards to workplace testing. So there's a whole list there of things that I would expect you to have thought about and added in, and that could be issued to staff on day one of returning. It could be issued to staff through their induction process, and obviously it would sit alongside all of your other policies with regards to lone working, working at height, for instance, first aid, and all the other policies that you've got. Happy to move on now. We talked about COVID marshals earlier, and the COVID marshal is now an important role that makes sure workplaces are COVID safe at all times. Community. What are the responsibilities of the COVID marshal? Well, it'd be singularly to cover and ensure the COVID safe plans are implemented. And marshals would advise on all the things we've really been talking about over the last hour, but social distancing measures, hygiene, ventilation, keeping accurate and robust records, COVID safe plans, organising awareness training, listening to staff concerns, and being that link between management and the workforce. And this could very well be the fire marshal or the health and safety competent person. Equally, it could be somebody totally different that's got a different set of eyes on the business. It could be you've got a team of 3 or 4 COVID marshals if you've got a large work area with various different departments and buildings, and they could meet maybe on a weekly, monthly basis to discuss the efficiency and effect of the COVID plans. But again, it absolutely is a worthwhile appointment, or it could be an upskill for a current member of the team, and it could really be a pivotal intervention with regards to keeping the workplace COVID secure. staff return to work reboarding guide. So this is a great tool to give staff and should house everything that they need to know. And again, would house a lot of the different things we've been talking about. But it's a central resource that will be available maybe on a health and safety information notice board, maybe in the staff room. But it really would be, and the objectives of the guide would be to give the staff confidence to work, to manage a safe return to the workplace, to think about any changes in behaviour that they would need to undertake, help them manage social distancing and understand the reasons for doing that and the benefits for doing that, the importance of good cleaning and hygiene, ultimately sharing good practice, learning from each other and being a unit, being one team to get through the pandemic together and return to work together. And obviously the overarching objective would be to ensure that everybody goes home safely at the end of the day. There's a number of examples out there online. We've just, as I said, just done one for our head office and our team. Please contact us if you'd like some support or guidance or advice on that. But I wholeheartedly believe it's a really beneficial guide to put in place. Staff communication is key and something that can't be ignored. As we've already broached earlier, some staff may have not been in for a number of months. Think about how they might feel. Are they nervous, anxious, or worried about coming back? It could be they're worried about their own health. It could be they're worried about taking the virus back to family or friends. It could be that they've had it themselves and their immune system has been compromised. It could be that they're suffering from now what we know as the after effects, commonly known as long COVID. How are we going to communicate with those staff? We've talked about meetings, doing it digitally, notice boards, or do you have some kind of intranet central resource? Could you set up a staff welfare group, or even a staff engagement committee that could be kind of chaired by your COVID marshals or your health and safety competent person, so it brings a number of people together from different departments if you've got a big enough resource to do that. And I think, again, involve everybody. You know, the staff do need to hear from the boss, the MD, the CEO. It shouldn't just be the guys on the shop floor, in the office or in the factory. It needs to be driven by, you know, the people at the top, the boss. That could be the chairman from the board or however your company structure is. It would be great for them to welcome staff back on day one and thank them for their, you know, their allegiance and for sticking around and obviously give them some sort of acknowledge and confidence to come back to the workforce. So staff communication is massive, and just think about how you do that currently and how you can improve that going forward when staff return back to the workplace. Happy to move on again. We talked about staff orientation, but has the building or operations have changed? You know, will staff know where things are when they come back? Think about safety systems. We've kind of talked about that already, which would be your first aid, fire, emergency systems, AED, and it could be that you've got fall restraint systems. You may have other things that we haven't talked about already. Think about your building layout. It could be that the building's changed. You may have moved throughout the process. You may have relinquished your head off of your factory and changed to a different one. Think about the staff orientation program there. Has the office or the work area layout changed? Have machines been changed? Is the operation still as it was 6, 9, 12 months ago? Have staff still got the complement they were using before? And certainly if machines or equipment has changed, do they then need to be trained in those new machines, and do they need to be deemed competent to use those machines? And again, think about doing a fire drill almost on day one. So one that serves the purpose of testing the fire alarm, but two, would staff know how to react and use fire extinguishers and which fire exit to use? Do the fire exits still open adequately, or are they all kind of seized up and there's things that are growing behind them, you know, vegetation or whatever it might be? So really, somebody needs to take this responsibility, which could well be the health and safety competent person or the operations manager, to make sure that the building operations are still effective and haven't changed, and also that staff understand what they should be doing and where they should be going should there be an emergency situation. Happy to move on again. Victoria talks about staff training earlier in the presentation, but I'm going to sort of move on from that. That, you know, do have staff got the qualifications they need, and has anything expired whilst they've been working from home? And the ones I've sort of elicited there would be first aid. You know, general first aid qualifications after 3 years. There was a period of time where the FIAB and the HSC were extending first aid qualifications, but they aren't currently. So it's back to the old rules and regulations. So think about whether you've got staff that are first aid trained and they're still in date. various professional qualifications. It could be that they're members of professional boards or panels or awarding bodies. Have they elapsed? If they need to do driving as part of their role, you know, forklift driving, HGV driving, that kind of thing, have their licenses and whatever they need to do expired, and are we then setting them up with to do a job where they're not qualified to do it anymore? And the same with machinery use. If they're using saws and beam saws or laser cutters or hot works or anything like that, should they have done some kind of internal and external training whilst they've been at home? How's this kind of captured? Is it on a spreadsheet? Is it on a training matrix? Have you got a digital system? Just think about how you could capture that. And again, think about everyone's job, and have you got a kind of task competency matrix that would then put all of this into, or relate all of this back to their job as an operative, as a driver, as a fabricator, welder, whatever it might be. So just think about staff training, and then think about how you could then bring in some staff training, whether it's a toolbox talk once a week for half an hour, whether it's a structured course from an external provider, whether there's somebody internally who could do it and deem somebody competent. And again, we can advise or support on that if you'd like us to, but just think about staff training and making sure they are adequately competent and qualified to do what they're supposed to be doing. So some of the signage and information that I alluded to as part of the first part of the webinar would be popping up now. The first poster is the new COVID-19 2021 poster, and you'll have seen that looking very similar last year in blue, and there's now a green one because some of the wording has changed. Please do make sure you've got the 2021 poster on public display. My view would be to have that on the front door, so that should you have an HSC EHO inspector decide to come and see you, the first thing that they're greeted with would be the COVID-19 workplace secure poster. But equally, it gives staff, customers, suppliers, contractors the confidence that you've done everything you can to be COVID secure. That needs to be signed by the highest ranking officer, chairman, CEO, MD. Moving to the right would be the Working Safely COVID guidance document, and that particular one talks about offices and contact centres, but there are 14 of these available, which cover hotel accommodation, manufacturing and retail, working safely in offices, and there's a whole variety. Please, again, it's a free resource. Download this and read it. It is a long read, but it's updated every few months. That particular one goes back to, I believe, September. I think there's now a March one, and I believe there's going to be one done in June, post-June 2021. It's an HM government document. It is free, so please use that. Moving to the right again is the CIBSE COVID-19 ventilation guide. It's the best one I've managed to find. There are others available, but this is the best one. This is the most explanatory one, and talks to you about exactly what you need to do in a workplace with regards to your ventilation. It's a free guide again. I think you just have to give the CIBSE your email address, and then they will email you the guide. And I found it most useful when I was putting together our staff guide. Bottom left would be the new COVID secure workplace poster. Many of you will probably have something similar for manual handling, slips, trips and falls, first aid, fire safety. This is the new one. It's available on Amazon. That's where I got ours from. I think it's about 10 or 12 pounds. It comes in A2 and A1 laminated form, and it's just a really good guide to sit next to your health and safety poster in a staff area, and tells everybody what they should be doing to create a COVID secure workplace. The central sign at the bottom will be a site safety sign, and I'm commonly seeing these now, building sites, factories, retail areas, storage solutions, that type of thing, and it just gives everybody a overview of the COVID rules and regulations going onto the site, and talks about, no handshakes. You can see there, face masks, sanitization, whatever it might be, and there's a number of these that you can get. Equally, you could build your own with regards to your own COVID policy, but it's a customer-facing sign, as is the alternative, which would be to the right again, which is a coronavirus information sign. Do not enter if, and if you do enter, these are our kind of rules and regulations. There's a whole variety of other ones out there, but they're very, very inexpensive. Most are downloadable and printable, but please put them around the workspace in staff areas and public areas if you're welcoming people back in or you're opening back up, because it will give everybody the confidence and also the assurance that you've looked at what you need to do to provide that COVID secure environment. Mental health, the first point there is everyone has suffered. We've all been through some sort of mental health issue over the last 12 months, whether it be very small to obviously the more extreme, some on a larger scale than others. But as employers and managers, you need to recognise and think about really what impact the virus has had on people's friends and family. They could have experienced and could still be experiencing a loss and bereavement. They could have had financial loss throughout the pandemic, or when they're working from home, they could have had a family member be made redundant or lose their job. They could have lost their house, which could all obviously impact on their mental health. They could be experiencing long COVID and or additional health issues as a result of COVID or underlying as it was. There could certainly be a feeling of isolation and loneliness from people that were maybe living alone, that didn't see friends or families or work colleagues for a long period of time. Due to that, there'll be a lack of social interaction. People need people, so that could also affect people's mental health. People's personal image of themselves may have changed. People may have put excessive weight on. They may have lost weight. They may not look the way they did. They may not be happy with the way they look. And I'm certainly hearing that more and more by teaching mental health courses, that people's personal image has suffered due to being at home and not being able to use, maybe going to the gym or whatever it might be. People have suffered due to a lack of routine. A lot of people like knowing what time they're going to work, what time they're coming home, what they're doing, and that lack of routine has been lost somewhat over the last certainly year. And again, people often feel that they haven't got a lack of purpose at the moment. They're looking forward to going back to work. But actually, interestingly, I was listening to a radio program on 5 Live, actually, BBC Radio 5 Live, where quite a lot of people aren't looking forward to going back to work. They've got in a routine of staying at home, taking the dog out in the morning, taking the kids to school, then working from home. They don't have to wear a suit and tie anymore. They can work from home in their joggers, but they're still doing the same work. So they feel now that they haven't got a purpose to go back. So welcoming people back to work may be a negative aspect, and that may impact on their mental health. There's a great link there. Again, there's loads available, but the mental health at work link, which again is an org link, a government link, is absolutely worth looking at. Mind have got their own, Mental Health England have got their own. We've got some stuff on our website as well about it, and we do a lot on mental health too. So there's loads of information, but just think about how all this could have affected people in a negative way when they're coming back to work. So mental health is as important as everything else. And here's how we can help. There's a number of guides that we put together. You'll see the 3 images on the right. We've done a COVID-19 risk assessment template. We've done a weekly COVID-19 check sheet that managers and competent people can go around and check the building, and we've done a visitor declaration form along with a load of others. They are free to download from our website. Please use them. We also offer a free 30-minute call with myself, where I can talk you through a lot of the stuff we talked about today, and or any concerns or issues you have. It is a free call. I'm more than happy to do that. And obviously we offer on-site training with regards to emergency plans, risk assessments and COVID policies. And we offer mental health first aid training. So please talk to us if there's anything we can help you with regards to any of this stuff to help you put in place a COVID secure workplace and or welcoming staff back to continue with what they were doing. There's also a self-assessment, free COVID-19 self-assessment that you can do. Really show you where the gaps could be, and it will give you a score at the bottom. It's kind of a red, amber, green, and it will give you an idea of where the gaps are. So very, very much a gap analysis tool. But again, please use that because it will give you some idea of what you need to put in place when you're bringing people back. There's a few ideas there of how we can help you, and we're more than happy to do that. Did you want to take this back, Victoria, with regards to signposting?
Yeah, and this is really just to let you know what's available. So for those of you that sign up to our knowledge base, then there's a lot of content there for you to use. So we've got a practical guidance document, excuse me, on managing a return to work, and we have various risk assessments in place. And then general guidance, excuse me, we have COVID-19 general guidance on our website, as well as there's also guidance for the government. Excuse me. Sorry about that. And then we've got the Health and Safety Executive. Right, so we've come to the end of the webinar. I'm so sorry, lost my voice. What I'm going to suggest, we've had lots of questions come in. What are we going to do is Dom and I will gather the questions at the end, and we're going to send out in writing all the answers to the questions that have come in. I can see we've got lots that are very similar in topic, and unfortunately due to timing, what we'll probably do is answer them and send out a document with the answers to those questions. But thank you ever so much for submitting those questions. And then just to conclude the webinar, as usual, we like to run a final poll, and this is around whether you'd be interested in finding out any more information or about any of our services after this webinar. So our HR services, HR training, the knowledge base, health and safety, service and training, and payroll. So please do let us know if there's anything that you'd like to hear about more on after the webinar. We'll get in touch with you. So I'll just leave that open for a little bit longer. Okay, and then I'll bring that to a close. Brilliant. So thank you for that. And then just to conclude our webinar, just to let you know that we do have some upcoming webinars. Next month is all about how to handle serious allegations safely. We then have in July a webinar that is about what are protected or without prejudice conversations. And then in August, the webinar is about remote working and how can you manage performance. Of course, if we've got any additional ones that we're going to add, we'll put those on our website and our knowledge base. And then we also have part of our business support 7 key success program that we're running with Nordens. You can watch on demand the first few that we have run, and then the next one's on Wednesday, and we've got 2 left of those. Now, we do have a lot of training sessions coming up, training courses that you might be interested in. So we have first aid for mental health, emergency first aid at work, health and safety, and fire marshal. They're all run by Dom. And due to the nature of them being health and safety nature and the practical side of it, they are in person rather than remote. So you get as much out of those sessions as you can. So these courses are detailed on our website as well as our knowledge base, and we then also have a couple of HR training sessions which are remote, and that's equality and inclusion and disciplinary and grievance. So they're coming up June, July. So please do explore with us if you'd like to attend any of those training courses. We then have, we can also then help support you with first aiders for mental health qualifications. So there's a slide here that just summarises that information with contact details. You will get a copy of these slides after the event. And then also, if you would like to support your employees, then we have links with an employee assistance programme. So do pursue that if you're interested. EAPs are about providing independent, impartial service to help your employees resolve difficulties more quickly and therefore minimise the impact on your business. So please consider that if you think that's going to be helpful to your business. And then if you do want to stay in the loop and be amongst the first to be invited to our webinars, then as well as receive our latest news, please do sign up to our newsletter, the details of which are here. And that does conclude our webinar today. If you do have any further questions, then please do contact us on the information that's on the screen. It's been great to have you join us. After the webinar, we shall be sending a short survey to capture your feedback. So it would really be appreciated if you could just complete that survey so that we can look to improve our service to you. So I'd like to say thank you for joining today. Apologies that we've overrun. I hope you appreciate there's a lot of information to go through in regards to supporting that return to work. So we do hope you found it useful. And I'd just like to thank Dom for his helpful information on the health and safety. Really useful stuff there. So thank you, Dom, for taking the time to join us today with sharing your expertise and knowledge. And so,
thanks for having me. It's been good.
Brilliant. And so that leaves us today to just end the webinar, and we hope that you can join us in all future webinars with us. Thank you all for attending, and take care.